Good morning, everyone. I am Abhishek Raj, Project Manager for Electric Bus Program and R&D Funding Program at Qtrich, and I'd like to extend my warmest welcome to all the attendees here at our first keynote for Qtrich's Low Carbon Smart Mobility Conference. At this conference, we strive to bring to you the best and brightest from the low carbon smart mobility domain. We have innovators, government representatives, municipal transit agencies, utility, and other transit members and other industry members in our midst. Our aim has been to continuously strive to educate and mobilize industry champions, policymakers, integrators, and planners to bring about positive change in this sector. Today, for this first keynote session, we have a transit agency champions amongst us, Kelly Palechni from London Transit. Kelly joined London Transit Commission in 1997 as the Manager for Information Technology. Over the course of her tenure at London Transit Commission, she has held the roles of Director of IT and Specialized Services, Director of Finance and Administration, and General Manager. Kelly is also a member of the executive on the board of directors of the Canadian Urban Transit Association and chair of the Ontario Public Transit Association. With that, I would like to directly go to Kelly. Hi, Kelly, and welcome to this first keynote session for today's conference.
Good morning. Oops.
Yep, thank you. So we will just be launching your slides here.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Palechni, General Manager of London Transit Commission in London, Ontario. As a bit of background, London Transit operates a fleet of approximately 217 conventional transit buses and pre-pandemic carried approximately 25 million riders per year. In addition, we provide specialized transit services through a contract providing an additional 350,000 annual trips. Next slide, please. As a bit of background, over the past few decades, London Transit has embraced new vehicle technologies as they've entered the marketplace. Not only were we one of the first to introduce the CNG low-floor buses, we were also one of the first Ontario systems to have a fully accessible transit fleet. From my perspective, the approaches taken to date for the introduction of new vehicle technologies has been at two opposite ends of the spectrum. In one case, we overcommitted, and in the other, we undercommitted, with neither resulting in a permanent change to our fleet makeup. I'll talk about each of these scenarios a bit further to provide some context and then close with the approach we are currently taking with the introduction of zero-emission buses into our fleet and my hope that we are taking the lessons learned from past experience and applying them to an implementation that will result in permanent change. Next slide, please. In the mid-90s, LTC signed on to purchase 50 low-floor CNG buses as well as the installation of an on-site CNG station and indoor fast fueling lanes, which required a significant facility overhaul. As I mentioned in the introduction, this approach is what I would consider an overcommitment. These buses were first generation of the combined low-floor structure powered by CNG, and given their newness, this venture was considered a risk, noting the 50 buses would represent approximately 1/3 of our conventional transit fleet, and they would be transitioned through a fast-track replacement schedule over a 3-year period. The required staff expertise to manage this undertaking was not in place, which led to significant downtime of buses that experienced issues early on. And while there was political buy-in for London to be a leader on the green and accessible fronts, there was not the required understanding of the potential service-related impacts that could result with a rollout of this nature. Combining new, untested technology at a rapid rate with no backup in the event of issues was not a successful formula for ensuring that the service was not negatively impacted. This initiative, like any other that includes the introduction of a new technology, included many setbacks and unforeseen issues, many of which led to difficulties meeting service on a regular basis due to the downtime associated with the buses. While some of the issues were able to be addressed, the reliability of this portion of the fleet continued to cause significant impacts on service delivery, and as a result, all of the CNG buses were retired from the fleet by 2007. Next slide, please. Throughout this period, and in hindsight, a number of critical lessons were learned with respect to the introduction of the new technology into the transit fleet, including remember what your core business is. It's customer service, and ensure that changes of this nature are undertaken in a manner that mitigates to any extent possible any negative experiences on the customer's behalf related to this rollout. Customers and stakeholders will be very excited to see these new buses and new technologies on the road. However, they'll be not very excited when buses aren't showing up on time to pick them up to get them to their destination. Phased introduction and testing is paramount for a successful rollout. Proper testing includes the operation for at least 1 year to ensure the impacts in all weather conditions are well understood. We also learned that we needed to better consider spare fleet ratio adjustments when new technology is introduced into the service, especially at a rate such as what was undertaken with this project. And finally, a transition of this nature requires significant investment in staff resources to ensure the buses and related technology can be serviced and maintained as required. Next slide, please. Moving forward to 2009, with the failures of the past project still fresh in everyone's mind, but with a continued desire to be a leader in the greening the fleet, LTC took a much more cautious approach to the introduction of hybrid diesel electric buses into the fleet, choosing to introduce them slowly as the fleet expanded versus the more rapid replacement schedule that we saw with the last transition. So four hybrid buses were purchased in 2010, followed by 2 in each of 2011 and 2012. In this case, there was no political buy-in required, as we were able to identify provincial gas tax funds to cover the differential in costs of the hybrid buses as compared to the diesel buses that had been included already in our long-term budget forecast. So there really was no impact to municipal council or to municipal budget, I'm sorry. The hybrid diesel electric buses had already been introduced to a number of fleets across the country, so the change wasn't as risky as the first venture. And given the small number of buses, there was really no fanfare associated with the project. However, this resulted in limited buy-in from our key stakeholders, which made the initiative potentially easier to abandon. Next slide, please. While this technology was somewhat more proven at the time the project kicked off than the CNG was, there was still a number of outstanding questions and concerns with respect to whether the buses would operate as promised and whether the savings in fuel and maintenance promise would be achieved. In addition, concerns with respect to any major component replacements required during the life of the bus remained, given that the buses that were in use in other systems had not yet reached the end of their useful life. In terms of the lessons learned in this venture, given the relatively small number of buses, the ability to test them in all scenarios was limited. In this case, the buses performed well and were not subject to major downtime. However, there was little evidence that the anticipated fuel savings would be achieved, which called into a question funding prospects going forward. In 2013, operating budget issues meant that the gas tax that we had been relying on for the differential in cost was no longer available as we required it for our operating budget. And given the limited stakeholder buy-in for this project, there were no other funding options available. This, coupled with the analysis completed that indicated the fuel savings garnered to date did not meet expectations, resulted in the decision to revert future bus expansions back to diesel technology, leaving LTC with an orphan fleet of 8 hybrid buses. Next slide, please. To finish, I'd like to talk about the path that LTC is currently on with respect to greening our fleet and how we are addressing and responding to some of the lessons learned over the past projects. Fortunately for LTC and other transit agencies working on fleet conversion, the landscape has drastically changed from the period in the 90s and early 2000s when we were all considering possible changes. First off, Qtric has changed the landscape significantly. They have numerous experts on staff, provide conferences to keep us up to date on new and emerging technologies, played a key role in getting the various pilot programs underway and funded, have a ZEB committee that allows for the sharing of information and best practices, and can provide systems with critical research and analysis through the use of their Route tool, which can predict the success levels of implementation at a route level. CUDA and Opta have also played a significant role, as they have had a focus on this topic at conferences and committees over the last number of years. Again, keeping all systems abreast of what's going on in this space. And finally, we've got federal funding programs right now that are specifically targeted at green transit technology, which it provides us all with the opportunity to get implementations underway. All of this leaves us better prepared for the complicated introduction of new best technology into our fleets and facilities. And it's important to emphasize the facility piece. I've heard from a number of transit systems that are further down the road than we are, that the buses are the easy part of this transition. While we are better prepared, in London's case, we were still at the learn from other systems stage of our plan for the introduction of zero emission buses into our fleet, when we received an unexpected nudge from our mayor, who committed during a 2019 State of the City address to proceeding with a fleet conversion as soon as possible. This announcement required a rethink with respect to our path forward, taking into account the lessons learned over the 2 decades. Important to know that at the time this announcement was made, there had been no formal resolutions or confirmations by our commission nor municipal council with respect to their support for such an initiative, nor had any financial forecasting with respect to a fleet conversion been included in any of our budget projections. You'll remember that one of the lessons learned with our past projects of this nature was to ensure stakeholder buy-in and understanding of the nature and scope of the project. In short, we had some work to do. The questions that were being posed by the commission and council members subsequent to this announcement were predominantly related to how quickly we could have electric buses operating in London. There was little understanding of what was required in order to introduce electric bus technology into a transit fleet, while at the same time ensuring that the transit system continued to operate and meet the expectations of our customers. We needed to find a way to change the channel and to illustrate to these key stakeholders that careful planning and well-defined approach was required in order to ensure a successful implementation. As a starting point, we recommended to our commission that we proceed with a fleet electrification analysis. This may appear on its surface as being premature, noting we had no plans or commitments for proceeding with this initiative. However, we believe the analysis would provide a solid picture of what would be involved with the transition. The report would be the basis for setting reasonable expectations and would also provide the opportunity to share with our key stakeholders the complexities associated with a conversion of this nature. CUTRIC completed this report in 2020, and it was presented to our commission and municipal council, providing the opportunity at both sessions to again reiterate the complexities associated with this undertaking. This approach provided a more complete understanding of the project for key transit stakeholders, as it clearly depicted that, based on current available technology, not all LTC routes could be converted on a one-to-one basis to zero-emission buses. It also provided some additional context around facility requirements relating to charging infrastructure, which would be required prior to the rolling stock in order to be able to operate the buses. In short, things weren't as simple as many stakeholders thought. This initial step essentially removed the preconceived notions by some stakeholders that undertaking a fleet transition of this nature was as simple as purchasing an electric car for personal use and plugging it into their garage. The conversation started to change, with the commission now recognizing that many facets of the project of this scope, and they began asking questions like, what is a reasonable time frame to expect to see electric buses in service in London? With a better understanding of a project like this, the commission approved the preparation of a full zero-emission bus implementation plan as the next step. The final plan will include consideration of a number of key aspects, including a recommendation for an initial project to get the program rolling, including identification of the routes that should be the first to be converted. This step was introduced as a way to satisfy the desire of political stakeholders to proceed with an initial step as soon as possible, taking advantage of federal funding programs that may be available. It will also include recommendations for charging infrastructure options, noting some routes have been identified as requiring opportunity charging, while others have been assessed as being able to operate with an overnight depot charge. It will consider the facility locations as part of the rollout, noting our largest facility at the Highbury location is at the end of its useful life and has been forecasted to be replaced within the next 10-year horizon. It will also include total cost projections for the entire project, split into short, medium, and long term, facility-related requirements relating to assessment of hydro availability at each site, and expansion footprint requirements of charging infrastructure, and finally, resource requirements and timing of same in order to ensure a smooth rollout. This plan is scheduled to be completed in late 2021 and will form the basis of a budget request to Council for both the short and long term. In an effort to avoid the orphan fleet issue we currently have with the hybrid buses, this approach looks to gain municipal council buy-in for the entire project, with a specific ask for the first few years that will allow us to get the project underway. A full disclosure and approval in principle of the long-term cost-benefit implications, as well as a solid, well-planned implementation plan that mitigates to the extent possible any negative impacts on service, will ensure a solid understanding of the project and hopefully make it more difficult for future decision to be made to abandon the project. Of course, the availability of funding for this initiative will be a key consideration of Council going forward. That summary brings us to where we are currently with respect to this initiative. We also continue to participate on the OPTA Zero Emission Bus Committee and participate in conferences and webinars on this topic as we prepare for our hopeful budget approval and issuance of an RFP in early 2022. One final word in closing, I'd like to thank CUTA, OPTA, and all transit agency business members and OEM representatives who have taken the time to speak at conferences and webinars or to share their knowledge and experience on various committees. I've always said that transit is a unique industry and that we are willing to share with one another so openly, and the sharing and collaboration that has and continues to go on with respect to ZEB rollouts is not only appreciated, but critical to our collective successes going forward. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. And I think you have highlighted some key insights there in terms of how to go ahead and plan an electric fleet optimally. I think optimally is the key word here, as you highlighted from your experience that there can be both issues with under-resourcing as well as over-resourcing. So many thanks to that. And London Transit Commission has really come forward as a champion in terms of going ahead with a study, identifying where exactly would be what exactly would be the short-term as well as the long-term requirements, and which would help in developing the plan to addressing those. So once again, thanks a lot for that, for those wonderful insights there. We already have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So I would start with the first question that I have in here. So many transit agencies across Canada are now beginning to start planning their fleet transition to zero emission buses. As a medium-sized transit agency, I would like to know how this feasibility analysis aided you in planning and mitigating the risks that you experienced so far during the challenges that you experienced from your previous similar undertakings.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I think generally just taking the time to plan out and think about the implications going forward, remembering that we have to continue to be able to operate at the same time. The analysis that we've already had completed certainly helped to temper some of the expectations that we saw with key stakeholders who, as I said, thought this was just a simple process. It was as simple as just buying a different kind of bus and putting them out on the road, just like we do the diesel buses every day. So having those details laid out and the various implications was very helpful for educating our stakeholders as well, which again tempered some of those expectations.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. I have another questions here. The other question says that how does your transit agency view commercial ventures such as joint procurement which might assist in reducing cost and enhancing knowledge sharing among transit agencies?
Again, as I said earlier, that's one of the things I've always found so great in the transit industry is the ability to share. I can say London Transit was one of the original members in the joint bus procurements that Metrolinx now still continues to provide. We also participate in joint procurements at a municipal and provincial level. So it's something that we've always been open to. And it needs to be recognized that not in all cases do you necessarily benefit in the joint bus procurement space. What we found is there's a bigger benefit to some of the smaller systems who they don't have the resources to be able to create those RFPs and tenders and do all of the work that's involved. So being part of that consortium, helps them get where they need to be and maybe gets them a break in pricing as well. And that's all part of being, the big transit family per se, is that we all benefit to different degrees, but when we all come together, then we certainly all benefit. So we're absolutely open to that.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. We are continuously getting more questions here. The next question here is that given the current state of financial affairs, like the present pandemic has decimated a lot of the budget for the municipalities. How do you think public transit is best poised to lead economic recovery, clean economy, and equity?
I think it is, and I think I've said this in other talks that I've had over the last number of months, that I think one of the silver linings, if there were any, that to come out of this pandemic was the greater appreciation and support for public transit from all levels of government and from all stakeholders. The pandemic really brought forth the need for a strong transit system to keep communities running, and the need for those transit systems to keep running. We saw the federal government, come to the table with operating funding, which is something we've never seen. So that recognition, that transit is the heart of communities, and it is what's going to, it kept us going through the pandemic. And if we can keep it rolling and keep it growing, it's going to certainly help with that economic rebound going forward. So I think transit is a key player in that.
Thanks, Kelly. And definitely, like, we have been seeing some completely novel innovations in terms of financing, and for the federal government to go ahead and reach out to the transit agencies and municipalities providing their support. So I'm quite hopeful that there is some new pathways in the making, and we see more and more support coming both from the federal government as well as from some other federal agencies in this regard. The next question that I have from audience from Bar Drive is London Transit considering the electrification of the specialized transit fleet in their plan as well?
So London Transit right now, our operating model is that we contract out vehicles and drivers for our specialized services. So we control the scheduling, the call taking, the customer service piece, but we contract out vehicles and drivers. So that if we were to consider that would be something that we would be done through a contract. We've just renewed a 7-year contract, or just started a 7-year contract right now. We're in year 2 of that contract. So it would be at least 5 or 6 years before we would be able to put provisions like that in the next contract that we would go out for vehicles.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Kelly. I will move on to further the new questions that are coming from the audience. I have another question from Tony Lomwe. Tony asks whether you can tell at this stage whether London Transit would be interested in hydrogen electric buses as well.
So when we did when Qtric did the analysis, we included hydrogen buses as part of that analysis, recognizing that there may be some of our routes that just weren't at the point where electrification made sense. So that consideration is certainly still on the table, and I think that's part of what we're looking. We're looking to Qtric as they come up with our full implementation plan to make recommendations with respect to that going forward. So certainly it's still on the table. We haven't ruled anything out at this point.
And definitely, and that brings out the need for the feasibility study. We need to know exactly which routes can be managed by the battery electric buses and which routes are best managed by hydrogen electric buses in order to optimally have an optimal deployment of buses for those specific routes. So I'm getting another question here. This question is from Anthony D. And Anthony asks, is there a significant difference in the amount of time it takes to procure CNG versus the electric vehicles from issuing the RFP to actually getting the wheels on the ground?
I can't really comment on that. We haven't issued an RFP for either. So
sure, so that's completely fine. So Anthony, to your knowledge, I'll just let you know that at present, from the placing of the order to the actual delivery of the battery electric buses, that is taking close to, I would say, an average of 12 months, but it might depend on various other circumstances with the manufacturer as well. But that is the high level information I just wanted to provide you in this regard. So moving on to the other questions that I'm receiving here. So this is a question coming from Diego Luis, and I think this is an important question. In addition to buying the buses, there is an entire infrastructure that needs to be considered in the implementation. What are the main current problems or challenges that LTC is currently facing in terms of a successful rollout?
So certainly, and I think I touched on that, where we've certainly heard loud and clear that the buses is the easy part, and complicating matters here in London is we've got a facility that we need to consider knocking down and rebuilding. And we thought we had plenty of room until this until this transition came into the picture, and now looking at what may be required in terms of charging infrastructure calls even that strategy into question. So certainly balancing all of those things, but looking to, and I mean, we're working, we're in discussions with Qtric and a number of other transit systems, looking at a what we'll call a turnkey RFP. So the request for proposal that would go out wouldn't be just for buses, it would be for a turnkey solution, so that we're we're getting everything that we need in order to be able to operate those buses versus multiple RFPs going out at the same time.
Thanks, Kelly, and that definitely highlights the need for the turnkey solution, so that while the buses are there, many transit agencies have exclaimed that the charger piece is also complex, and that definitely needs some kind of there needs to be some kind of a joint tendering or some kind of a turnkey solution that would be the best fit in here. I will move on to the last question for the session today, and this is coming from Doug Parker from IBI Group. So Doug is asking whether the redefining of the service blocks can be considered in order to reduce the number of longer blocks. And he also highlighted that he understands that this could have some fleet size implications as well.
Yes, and that was identified in the initial analysis that Qtric undertook, that there are things that we can do as an agency to help make some of those routes or blocks more I guess more prone to being able to be converted to CNG. So that's certainly all things that will be looked at as we move forward. So yeah, it wasn't just well, we can't do this now. I think the other thing that we have to consider is, well, there's some routes right now that don't look like they're optimal to be able to electrify. With the rapid rate that technology is changing, we're seeing bigger batteries that last longer, those types of things. They may just be routes that are better left to the end of the implementation in hopes that technology will catch up and there'll be that opportunity. So I think all of those things are part and parcel of what we're looking for in that full implementation plan.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think now we are very close to the end of the keynote session. So I have one last question. So my question is a simple one. What guidance would you provide to fellow transit agencies if they tell you that they want to go ahead with their transit electrification plan?
get on as many committees, participate in conferences, reach out to your transit partners. I mean, like I said, everybody that's already in this has been so great with sharing, sharing their best practices, their lessons learned. But again, yeah, get involved with the industry and get yourself up to speed.
Yes, thanks a lot, Kelly, with that message. And I would like to thank all the audience for attending these questions and for posing those insightful questions there. And we have a lot of content here for the during the entire conference for you. And I hope you go ahead and attend other sessions as well. So with that, I would like to wish you a great day ahead. And thanks a lot, Kelly, as well. See you.
Thank you.